name is Nathan Cole, and I serve as a fire lookout stationed deep within the forests of British Columbia. I accepted this solitary position not only because I craved the quiet isolation of the mountains, but also because there was a certain allure in watching over a wilderness so vast, so unforgiving, that it demanded constant vigilance. My days are defined by routine, scanning the horizon for smoke, logging weather conditions, and recording any unusual disturbances. It sounds simple enough, yet this position comes with a list of rules. They are not written in the training manuals, nor are they formally acknowledged by the Forestry Service. Instead, they were handed to me in a worn leather notebook by the last lookout who descended from this tower, a man who spoke little and whose eyes never seemed to rest. His parting words were as unsettling as the list itself. Follow them, or you won't last long up here. At first, I believed the rules were nothing more than superstition or campfire legend. I had heard stories about old trappers who spoke of strange lights in the trees, or First Nations accounts of figures wandering between worlds. The forest has always been a place where myths thrive, but I considered myself rational, tethered to reality by science and observation. The rules, however, did not read like folklore. They were blunt, direct, and terrifying in their specificity. They warned me of events I did not want to imagine, much less witness. And yet each day I spend here high in the tower, with only the wind and ravens for company, I find myself glancing at the notebook more often than I care to admit, as though its pages carry not advice but survival. The tower stands on a ridge, overlooking endless tracts of pine and cedar, the mountains rolling away like waves of dark green until they dissolve into mist. The silence here is oppressive, broken only by the occasional cry of an eagle or the whisper of the trees swaying in unison. My first night was peaceful, almost idyllic. I cooked beans on a small propane stove, listened to the radio crackle with distant voices, and watched the stars spread like scattered embers across the black sky. But when the night deepened and the forest grew utterly still, I remembered the notebook. Its rules tugged at the corners of my mind, so I opened it by lantern light and read them again, my pulse quickening with each line. The first rule was simple: never leave the tower after midnight. The explanation, or rather the lack of one, gnawed at me. Why midnight? The forest does not change at the stroke of 12. Predators do not suddenly appear because the clock has turned. Yet the sternness of the instruction left me unsettled. The second rule followed with even less comfort. If you hear someone calling your name from the tree line, do not answer. Do not look. Stay inside. That one made me pause, the lantern trembling slightly in my grip. How could the writer know there would be voices? Whose voices would they be? And how would they know my name? The third rule was stranger still. If you see a fire burning in the valley, but no smoke rises, do not report it. Close the shutters and wait until morning. As a lookout, my very purpose is to report fires immediately. The contradiction struck me as a cruel joke, or perhaps a test of my gullibility. And yet, beneath the sarcasm I felt in that moment, a shadow of unease lingered. The rules continued, some even more bizarre than the rest. Do not allow the radio to go silent for more than an hour. If a raven lands on the railing and does not move when approached, leave it alone. If someone climbs the ladder and you hear them, but never see them, do not open the hatch. Each instruction carried with it the weight of experience, as if whoever wrote them had suffered consequences for disobedience. And that thought alone made it impossible to dismiss them entirely. During my first week, I did my best to ignore the creeping dread that the rules instilled in me. The forest was calm, the weather cooperative. I spotted only the usual wildlife, a black bear foraging along the slope, deer drinking from a distant stream, and the ever-present flocks of crows wheeling above the canopy. I recorded temperatures, wind speed, and humidity with precision, relaying the data back to the base station. Everything was ordinary, or at least as ordinary as life in complete isolation can be. But isolation does things to the mind. The silence begins to press against you like a weight, and every creak of the wooden tower sounds like a whisper. It was on the 5th night that I first understood why the rules existed. The day had been uneventful. The sky was overcast but dry, and I spent hours scanning the ridges through my binoculars. When dusk settled, I prepared a simple dinner and wrote in my log. By 10 o'clock, the forest was swallowed in darkness, and a low mist curled between the trees. I sat by the window with a lantern beside me, reading to pass the hours until sleep. Around 11, I began to nod off, lulled by the rhythmic sigh of the wind. I must have drifted, because when I startled awake, the lantern flame had guttered low and the clock read 12:15. That was when I heard it, my name. Soft, distant, carried on the night air like a thread of smoke. Nathan. At first, I thought it was a dream, some remnant of sleep clinging to my ears. But then it came again clearer, from the tree line below the tower. Nathan, come down. My blood turned to ice. I froze, every muscle locked in place. The voice was familiar, achingly so. It sounded like my sister, Emily. She has not spoken to me in years, not since we drifted apart after our parents' death. And yet here she was, or something wearing her voice, calling to me from the darkness of the forest miles from the nearest road. I nearly stood, nearly pressed my face to the glass to search the trees, but the rule thundered in my head. If you hear someone calling your name from the tree line, do not answer. Do not look. Stay inside. I clutched the notebook like a talisman and forced myself to stay seated. My breath came shallow, ragged. The voice called again, this time pleading, almost weeping. Nathan, it's so cold. Please. I pressed my palms to my ears, rocking slightly in the chair, refusing to listen. Minutes stretched into eternity. Eventually, the voice faded, swallowed by the endless dark, and the forest returned to silence. I do not know how long I sat there, shaking, but when dawn finally broke, the relief was so profound I nearly wept. After that night, I could not laugh off the rules. They were not superstition, not idle warnings. They were shields against something I could not comprehend, something that moved in the forest when the sun abandoned the sky. I began to follow them with near, religious devotion, double checking the shutters, ensuring the radio hummed softly at all times, and never, ever stepping onto the ladder after midnight. Yet fear clung to me, persistent as the mist that shrouded the valleys each morning. I wondered how many others had stood here before me, clutching the same notebook, hearing their own names whispered from below. The second encounter came 3 nights later. It was close to dusk when I spotted a glow in the valley to the north, a soft orange shimmer through the trees. My heart leaped into duty mode. I raised the binoculars, expecting to see smoke rising from a careless campfire, or worse, the beginnings of a wildfire. But through the lenses, I saw flames dancing brightly without a trace of smoke above them. I stared for minutes, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. The fire burned too steadily, too cleanly. It was wrong. My first instinct was to call it in, to grab the radio and report coordinates, but the rule stopped me cold. If you see a fire burning in the valley, but no smoke rises, do not report it. Close the shutters and wait until morning. Every ounce of training screamed at me to break the rule, to save the forest from what looked like certain destruction. But my memory of the voice from the tree line held me fast. I forced myself to close the shutters, though my hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the latch. All through the night, the glow bled around the edges of the wood, flickering like a heartbeat. When dawn came, I opened the shutters with dread, only to find nothing but unbroken forest, damp and green, as though no fire had ever existed. It was then I realized the rules were not only about survival, they were about endurance. The forest would test me, wear me down, attempt to lure me into breaking them. My sanity was the battleground, and if I failed, if I slipped even once, I might not return from whatever lay beyond those lines in the notebook. The forest did not relent after that night. If anything, it grew bolder, as though testing the edges of my resolve. My days became rituals of observation and repetition, but my nights turned into endurance trials, where every sound carried significance. I could no longer convince myself that the rules were precautionary suggestions. They were law, and the wilderness outside seemed determined to see whether I would break them. The radio was my lifeline, not only to the base station but to my own sanity. Each hour, I kept it alive with some noise, weather updates, static, even humming along with faint signals that wandered into range. I noticed something peculiar when I allowed it to sit silent for too long, just long enough for my mind to drift toward comfort. The tower itself would feel different. The boards creaking in slow, deliberate patterns, as if someone were pacing just beneath me. Once I let the silence stretch to nearly an hour while I prepared a meeple. When I returned, the air felt charged, heavy. The hair on my arms rose as though electricity moved through the walls. A scratching noise came from beneath the floorboards. I rushed to switch the radio back on, static roaring to life, and the sensation passed instantly. I didn't need to test that rule again. One evening, just after sunset, I heard the ladder groan. My heart seized. The tower is tall, its ladder rising 30 feet into the air. The wood does not flex unless something heavy presses against it. I froze, listening. The creaking grew louder, closer, step by step. My first thought was a bear, but no bear climbs a ladder with such slow, deliberate rhythm. I stood by the hatch, hand poised on the latch, when the rule surfaced in my memory. If someone climbs the ladder and you hear them but never see them, do not open the hatch. I held my breath, waiting. The footsteps stopped directly below me, the hatch trembling slightly as though weight pressed against it. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "Don't open it. Don't open." For nearly an hour, the pressure remained. Then, as silently as it had come, it withdrew. When I finally dared to glance outside at dawn, the ladder was empty, untouched, as though nothing had happened. I did not mention this to base when I made my morning check-in. Some things are better left unspoken. The days began to blur together, my logbook filled with routine entries, but between the lines, I scribbled desperate notes of the unexplainable. The voice in the forest, the fire with no smoke, the unseen climber. Each event tested a different rule, as if the forest kept a list of its own and checked it against mine. Sleep became scarce, fractured by strange noises and by dreams that felt less like imagination and more like visitation. I dreamed of shadows passing beneath the tower, of faces pressed against the windows, of smoke rising from fires that should not burn. I woke often drenched in sweat, convinced someone stood at the foot of my bed. It is difficult to hold on to rationality when the night itself conspires against you. On the 12th night, I awoke to the sound of tapping against the glass. Not loud, not frantic, but steady. Tap, tap, tap. I turned in my bunk, the lantern beside me casting weak light, and saw nothing but darkness beyond the window. The tapping continued, measured, unrelenting. I forced myself to remain still, every nerve alight. Then came a sound that filled me with dread wings. A heavy flutter, followed by the scrape of talons against the railing outside. Slowly, I approached the window and peered through the glass. A raven sat on the railing, its feathers slick and shining as though drenched in oil. Its eyes were too bright, catching the lantern light in a way that looked almost human. I remembered the rule. If a raven lands on the railing and does not move when approached, leave it alone. I tested it, inching closer, waiting for it to startle and fly away like any ordinary bird. It didn't move. It remained fixed, head cocked, watching me. I backed away and returned to my bunk, forcing myself to turn the lantern off. The tapping ceased only when I surrendered to darkness. In the morning, the railing bore deep scratches where its talons had gripped, far too long for a single bird to leave in one night. By then, I knew I was not merely a watcher of the forest. I was part of some greater struggle within it. The rules were not defenses against wildlife or weather. They were protections against something older, stranger, and far less forgiving. I began to wonder how many lookouts had failed before me. The man who gave me the notebook had looked worn, hollowed out, as though he had seen things he could not speak of. Did the forest claim those who disobeyed? Did it keep them? As the second week stretched on, I grew hyper-aware of every sound. The creak of the tower in the wind, the rustle of branches far below, the whistle of air across the shutters. One night, I heard laughter, faint at first, almost like leaves chattering in the breeze. But soon it grew louder, more distinct. It was the laughter of children. High-pitched, joyful, utterly out of place in the vast silence of the mountains. My throat closed in panic. The laughter circled the tower, moving from one side to the other, rising and falling as though they were playing some unseen game. I clutched the notebook, flipping through its pages, desperate to find guidance. There was no rule about laughter, no rule about children. I sat frozen in the corner, powerless, as the sound continued for nearly an hour before fading into nothing. I did not sleep until dawn. The absence of rules for some events disturbed me more than the rules themselves. What was I to do when the notebook offered no direction? Was silence my only defense? My thoughts grew erratic. I began to pace the small cabin atop the tower, muttering to myself, rehearsing the rules like a mantra. Never leave the tower after midnight. Don't answer the voice. Don't report the fire. Keep the radio alive. Leave the raven alone. Don't open the hatch. I spoke them until my throat burned, as though repetition alone could shield me. It was the 17th night when the worst test arrived. A storm swept over the mountains, lightning splitting the sky and rain lashing against the windows. The tower shuddered with each gust of wind. I clung to the railing inside, watching sheets of water pour down, when I saw a light moving through the trees below. Not fire, not lightning, but a lantern, swaying gently as though carried by a hand. My stomach clenched. No one should be here. The nearest ranger station was miles away, and no one would climb through a storm like this. The light moved steadily closer, weaving between the trunks, until it stopped at the base of the tower. I held my breath, waiting. Then, through the howl of the wind, I heard a voice. Not a stranger's voice this time. My father's. He's been dead for 7 years. Nathan, he called, gentle, reassuring, the same tone he used when I was a child lost in the woods. It's all right. Come down. I'll take you home. My heart cracked. The longing to hear his voice again, to see his face, was almost unbearable. My hand found the latch of the hatch before I realized what I was doing. The rule thundered through my skull. Never leave the tower after midnight. I clenched my fist, forcing myself to stay rooted in place. Nathan, the voice repeated, softer now, tinged with sadness. Don't you trust me? I shut my eyes, tears stinging, and whispered to the empty room, you're not him. You're not real. The light flickered once, twice, and vanished into the storm. When dawn broke, the forest was pristine, as if no storm had ever passed. Not a branch out of place, not a drop of water clinging to the leaves. Only the tower bore evidence of the night, its boards soaked, its shutters trembling on their hinges. I sat by the window, exhausted, staring at the endless sea of trees, and realized the truth. The rules are not only instructions, they are boundaries. The forest presses against them, searching for weakness, and the moment I fail, it will consume me. I don't know what lies beyond those boundaries, but I am certain it waits, patient and hungry. The days stretched thin after the storm. I found myself staring longer into the distance, as if the horizon might shift or betray some secret. The forest was vast, but it never felt empty. My binoculars caught flashes of movement too quick to place, shadows weaving between the trees, figures just out of focus. When I blinked, they were gone. Sometimes I wondered if the binoculars themselves betrayed me, revealing things I was not meant to see. Still, I logged everything carefully, pretending that order could hold back the chaos pressing at the edges of my sight. The rules weighed heavier with each passing night. Their simplicity haunted me, because behind every blunt command was the memory of something I had witnessed. The voice in the trees, the fire without smoke, the raven, the unseen climber, the lantern in the storm, all of them pressing, testing, taunting, and I knew I had not yet seen the worst. That certainty sat in my stomach like a stone. One afternoon, when the sky was clear and blue, I tried to reclaim some sense of normality. I brewed coffee on the stove and sat with the radio humming softly beside me. I told myself I would make it through, that all this was manageable if I just followed the rules. That was when the radio crackled, not with bass chatter, not with distant stations, but with my own voice. My hand froze midair, the cup trembling. "Nathan Cole, this is Lookout Tower 7. Do you copy?" It was my voice, calm, professional, exactly as I would sound during a standard check-in. But I had not spoken. The call repeated, identical, down to the pause between words. I stared at the radio, sweat prickling my skin. Slowly, I turned the dial to static. The voice continued, unaffected by the change. "Nathan Cole, this is Lookout Tower 7. Do you copy?" Louder this time, sharper. I ripped the power cord free, plunging the room into silence. For a long while, I sat frozen, listening, waiting. The silence remained, but the rules echoed in my mind. Do not allow the radio to go silent for more than an hour. I forced myself to plug it back in, heart pounding, and turned the volume up. Static filled the cabin, merciful and steady. I watched the clock with rigid attention until 60 minutes passed, then another 60, and nothing more came. But I could not forget the sound of my own voice calling from nowhere. Nights became heavier. Sleep was shallow, my dreams increasingly vivid. One dream brought me back to my childhood, wandering the woods near our family cabin. My father walked ahead, lantern swinging in his hand, his silhouette familiar, comforting. But when he turned, his face was wrong. It was smooth, featureless, as if carved from wax. I jolted awake, gasping, certain I was not alone in the tower. The air smelled of wet earth, though no rain had fallen. I never returned to sleep that night. By the third week, my body carried exhaustion like an anchor. I ate less, spoke less into the log. The forest no longer felt like something outside me. It had seeped into my thoughts, curling around every corner of my mind. The rules were no longer just written on paper, they were etched into my bones. I whispered them without realizing it, muttering under my breath as I scanned the horizon. They became prayer, chant, survival. And still, the forest pushed. It was near dusk when I saw movement at the base of the tower again. At first, I thought it was another trick of the mist, but then I made out a figure. A man, standing perfectly still at the tree line, staring up at me. His clothes were wrong, torn flannel, jeans shredded at the knees, his body soaked as though he had walked through a river. I reached for the binoculars, but dread anchored my hands. I didn't want to see his face. Something in me screamed not to. He stood there for hours, motionless, long after the light faded. I shut the shutters one by one, refusing to watch. In the morning, when I dared to look again, the ground below was covered in wet footprints circling the tower. That day, I considered radioing base to request extraction. I imagined the helicopter beating through the sky, the relief of human contact, the sudden end of this nightmare. But when I touched the microphone, my hand froze. Something whispered in the back of my skull. "You cannot leave until the forest allows it." I told myself it was only my mind fracturing under pressure, but the thought persisted. Even if I called, would anyone come? Would they even hear me? Or would my voice on the other end answer, just as it had before? I put the microphone down and forced myself back into routine. The tests grew crueler. One night, long after midnight, I heard knocking at the hatch. Slow, deliberate 3 raps. A pause, 3 more. My pulse thundered. I stayed perfectly still, clinging to the rule, never open it. But then came a voice, trembling, weak. "Nathan, it's me. Please, let me in. Emily again." My sister's voice broken, as though she had been wandering lost for days. I pressed my hands over my ears, shaking, whispering no, no, no. The knocking grew frantic, then stopped. Silence pressed in until dawn. When I opened the shutters that morning, the ladder was slick with blood. No footprints, no body. Just dark stains that trailed into the forest. I did not clean it. I could not bring myself to touch it. My faith in the rules was unshakable now, but I began to wonder how long they could protect me. Each night was a siege, each day a fragile reprieve. The forest learned, adapted, circled me like a predator. It knew my weaknesses, my grief for my father, my guilt about Emily, my fear of being forgotten out here. It spoke in voices I longed for, wore faces I missed. It made me doubt myself. Sometimes, I thought I saw my reflection move differently in the lantern glass, smiling when I did not. Once, in the mirror above the sink, I saw my mouth form words though no sound came. I smashed the mirror and buried the shards outside the tower. On the 22nd night, I was tested harder than ever. The forest was silent, oppressively so, not a single cricket or rustle of wind. Around 2 in the morning, the shutters began to rattle. First softly, then violently, as though dozens of hands beat against them in unison. The tower groaned under the assault. I clutched the notebook to my chest, whispering the rules aloud, louder and louder, until I was shouting them into the storm of noise. Never leave the tower after midnight. Do not answer the voice! Do not report the fire! Keep the radio alive! Leave the raven alone! Do not open the hatch! My voice cracked, tears streaming, but the pounding did not stop. I thought the shutters would give, that the glass would shatter. Then, suddenly, cider silence as if the forest held its breath. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping, rocking in the dark until the first gray light of morning seeped through the cracks. When I finally dared to open the shutters, the forest appeared untouched. But on the glass of each window, smeared in dirt and ash, were handprints, hundreds of them. Some large, some small, pressed against the panes as though a crowd had gathered, desperate to enter. They remained for days, until the rain finally washed them clean. I began to understand the truth of my situation. The rules were not only about surviving the forest, they were about surviving myself. The forest preyed on weakness, on longing, on despair. It was patient, merciless. The man who gave me the notebook had seen this. Perhaps he survived because he followed the rules. Or perhaps he escaped only because he passed them on to me. I did not know if he lived still, or if the forest claimed him in some other way. What I did know was that I could not falter. One mistake, one breach, and I would never leave this tower again. Yet even as I clung to the rules, a deeper fear gnawed at me. What if the rules were not absolute? What if one night the forest decided to change them? Already, it had shown me things not listed. Children's laughter, my voice on the radio, What if the rules were not protection, but bait? A way of keeping me here long enough for the forest to wear me down completely. The thought festered, growing darker each night. And in my exhaustion, I began to wonder if there would come a moment when even the rules could not save me. The tower had become both refuge and prison. I no longer thought of leaving it, not because I didn't want to, but because I feared what would happen if I tried. The forest had shown me enough to convince me that escape was not simple. Still, every morning when I checked in with base, the option lingered unspoken. I could request extraction, but my voice always faltered before the words could form. What if I asked, and the voice that answered wasn't human? What if I called, and what came for me wasn't a helicopter? By the fourth week, exhaustion had consumed me. My body sagged under the weight of sleepless nights, and my mind frayed at the edges. The rules remained my only compass, yet even they felt like fragile lifelines, threads stretched thin over a chasm. The forest had patience I could not match. It waited, pressing just hard enough to erode me piece by piece. One evening, as twilight bled across the ridges, I spotted something unusual on the horizon. Through my binoculars, I saw another tower. I knew there was no tower within visible range. I had studied the maps, committed every structure to memory, and yet there it was, a shape against the fading light, identical to my own. The sight filled me with sudden, dizzying hope. Another lookout, another human being. Proof I wasn't alone. My hand reached instinctively for the radio, then hesitated. I checked the notebook, flipping through its pages, desperate to find a rule that matched what I was seeing. There was nothing. No warning, no instruction. I turned the binoculars again, but the second tower had vanished. Only trees and shadows remained. My hands shook as I lowered the glass. Was it a mirage, a trick of the mist, or had I glimpsed something I was not supposed to? That night, the radio betrayed me again. Amid the static, I heard voices, many voices, speaking at once, overlapping, indistinct. Some laughed, some wept, some whispered, and beneath it all, a single phrase repeated, over and over, "You're late. You're late." I yanked the cord, plunging the room into silence, then cursed myself for breaking the rule. I plugged it back in, heart hammering, but the voices had stopped. Only static hummed. I sat rigid, watching the minutes crawl, forcing myself to keep it alive through the night. My mind reeled with what the words might mean. Late for what? Late for whom? The following evening, as the sun fell behind the mountains, I saw movement in the clearing below. A group of figures emerged from the trees, walking slowly, deliberately. There were 5 of them, each one carrying a lantern. Their light cast long shadows across the grass, their pace unhurried, almost ceremonial. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to discern details. Their clothing was ragged indistinct, as though woven from mist. They did not look up at me, did not acknowledge the tower. Instead, they gathered in a circle at the clearing's center. One by one, they placed their lanterns on the ground, forming a ring of light. Then they stood motionless, silent. Hours passed. My eyes burned from watching. Finally, just before dawn, the figures extinguished their lanterns in unison and melted back into the trees. The clearing was empty by daylight, save for a ring of scorched earth where the lanterns had burned. No rule prepared me for them. I could only watch, powerless, and wonder if the forest had grown tired of subtlety. Sleep deserted me entirely after that night. My body existed in a haze, fueled only by coffee and fear. I began to see things even in daylight. Shadows flickering between the pines, shapes reflected in the glass that were not behind me. Once, while scanning the valley, I spotted a figure climbing the opposite ridge, moving with uncanny speed, leaping from boulder to boulder. I blinked, and it was gone. But I could not shake the certainty that it had looked back at me before vanishing. The rules were both anchor and torment. I whispered them constantly, afraid to forget even one. Sometimes, though, I questioned them. Why did they exist at all? Who had written them? The notebook was old, its pages yellowed, some corners smudged with dirt or ash. The handwriting varied, as though multiple people had added to it over the years. How many lookouts had come before me? How many had survived? Or had each only lasted long enough to add one more rule to the list? The thought chilled me. Perhaps I was not meant to endure, only to carry the rules one step further before passing them on. On the 26th night, something broke. The forest no longer tested me. It demanded. It was just past midnight when the air shifted. The silence was not emptiness but fullness, as though the trees themselves leaned closer, listening. I sat rigid in my chair, lantern low, radio humming faintly. Then the shutters slammed open all at once, as if struck by invisible hands. Wind roared through the tower, scattering papers, toppling the lantern. The room plunged into darkness. I scrambled for the matches, my fingers shaking, but before I could strike one, I felt it. A presence. Not outside, inside. The air pressed against me, thick, suffocating. Something moved in the dark, slow and deliberate. My breath caught. I whispered the rules, desperate, frantic. Never leave the tower after midnight. Don't answer the voice. Don't report the fire. Keep the radio alive. Leave the raven alone. Don't open the hatch. My voice cracked, my chest heaving. The presence edged closer, the boards groaning under unseen weight. I struck the match with trembling hands. Light flared and revealed nothing. Only the empty cabin, my scattered notes, the lantern rolling across the floor. But the feeling remained, watching, waiting. It did not leave until dawn, when the sun rose. The forest looked unchanged, indifferent. I cleaned the cabin, returned the shutters to their hinges, relit the lantern. But I knew something had shifted. The forest no longer lingered outside. It had entered the tower. The rules had been breached, not by me, but by whatever lived in those trees. And if the rules could not hold, then nothing separated me from it anymore. The next night confirmed my fear. At precisely midnight, the radio cut to silence on its own. I rushed to adjust the dial, but it remained dead. Not even static. I banged the side, checked the cords, nothing. And then the voices began again, not from the radio but from the walls, the floor, the air itself. My name whispered from every direction. Nathan. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The voices seeped into my skull, rattling through bone and blood. I shouted the rules, screamed them into the night, but the voices only laughed. It lasted until dawn, when suddenly the radio hummed back to life as though nothing had happened. I realized then that the rules were not promises. They were bargains. Boundaries, yes, but boundaries that could be tested, eroded, broken. The forest wanted me, and it was only a matter of time before it found a way. My only hope was endurance, lasting longer than those before me, clinging to sanity until my shift ended and relief arrived. If relief arrived. But even that hope began to wither. The logbook I kept, once filled with weather and routine notes, now bore only frantic scrawls, voices again. Lantern circle. Presence inside. Rules failing. My handwriting grew jagged, desperate. Some nights I didn't remember writing at all, only waking to find new pages filled with words I didn't recall. Once, I found a sentence written over and over. There are no rules here. There never were. I tore the page out and burned it, terrified that acknowledging it would make it true. On the 30th night, as the moon rose over the ridges, I faced the cruelest test yet. A knock came at the hatch, soft, tentative. I froze, every muscle tensed. Then a voice followed, clear, strong, hackingly familiar. Nathan, it's Emily. Please let me in. I can't do this anymore. My throat closed. Tears welled unbidden. I hadn't spoken to my sister in years. not since anger and silence split us apart. To hear her voice now, begging broken, it was unbearable. My hand moved to the latch, trembling, desperate. The rule burned in my skull, do not open the hatch. I pressed my forehead to the wood, sobbing. You're not her, I whispered. You're not her. But the voice broke into weeping, ragged human. Nathan, please. Please don't leave me out here. I clamped my hands over my ears and screamed, rocking on the floor until my throat was raw. When dawn came, the hatch was clean, untouched. But the memory of her voice lingered, sharp as broken glass in my chest. I knew then that I could not last much longer. The forest had found every weakness, every wound, and it would not stop until I broke. The rules were failing, or perhaps I was failing them. Either way, the end was coming. And deep down, a darker thought gnawed at me. Maybe the rules had never been about survival. Maybe they were only about prolonging the inevitable. I stopped marking the days on the calendar after the 30th night. Time no longer felt like something measured. It was a weight pressing down, each hour indistinguishable from the last. The forest had eroded my sense of progression. Dawn and dusk were only shifts in color, not salvation. I lived by rules, not by days, and even those rules were fraying like old rope. The notebook remained on my desk, its edges curled, its pages greasy with handling. I clung to it, though a part of me hated it. It had become both scripture and curse, binding me to this tower, defining my reality. Every word inside it had proven itself true, and yet it offered no comfort. The rules were survival, but they were also reminders that survival was conditional. Break one, and you were lost. Follow them all, and you were only spared until the next test. The forest did not relent. It wanted me to fail, and each night it became more cunning. One morning, after a night of relentless whispers at the windows, I spotted something in the valley that chilled me more than any voice or shadow had. There was smoke rising. Real smoke, thick and black, curling from a patch of forest several miles to the west. My binoculars confirmed it a fire, flames tearing through underbrush, devouring pine. The rule came to mind instantly. If you see a fire burning in the valley but no smoke rises, do not report it. But this fire had smoke. I grabbed the radio, relief surging, finally certain of my duty. At last, I could act without question. Base, this is Tower 7, I said, my voice trembling. I've got smoke, heavy fire west of my location. Requesting confirmation. Static hissed, then silence. I repeated the call, nothing. Minutes dragged. Then the radio crackled alive with a voice. My own voice. Copy that? Tower 7. Fire confirmed. Stay where you are. Help is on the way. The blood drained from my body. I sat frozen, the microphone still in my grip. My voice repeated again, exactly the same words, same tone, like a recording. Copy that. Tower 7. Fire confirmed. Stay where you are. Help is on the way. Over and over, 5 times, then silence. The smoke still rose in the valley, undeniable, real. But I could not trust it. Not anymore. The smoke was gone by morning. The trees stood untouched, green and pristine, as if fire had never touched them. My logbook entry for the day was a scrawl fire with smoke. My voice on the line. I don't know which rules apply anymore. The tower's walls seemed to close in after that. I no longer trusted what I saw, what I heard, even what I wrote. The forest had breached every defense, pressing through sight, sound, memory. My exhaustion made me a traitor to myself. More than once, I found my hand reaching for the hatch in the middle of the night, my body moving before my mind caught up. Twice, I woke at the window with my face pressed to the glass, searching for voices that had called me from dreams. I no longer believed that the rules were protecting me. I believed they were the only thread delaying my collapse. The raven returned on the 33rd night. I heard its wings before I saw it, a heavy, deliberate beating that settled on the railing. its claws scraped, anchoring deep. I lit the lantern and approached the glass, praying it would fly away like any natural creature. It didn't. Its head turned toward me, eyes glinting with cold fire. It didn't blink. I remembered the rule, leave it alone. This time, though, the rule felt like surrender. I leaned closer, inches from the glass, and whispered, "What are you?" Its beak opened, and though no sound reached me through the window, I heard the word clear in my skull. Waiting. My body went cold. I stumbled back, knocking the lantern to the floor. When I rose, the raven was gone. The scratches it left in the wood were deeper this time, gouges rather than marks. They remain even now. From that night forward, I no longer doubted the forest's intelligence. It was not a collection of tricks, not scattered hauntings. It was one presence, vast and patient, wearing different faces, testing different weaknesses. The rules were not instructions against accidents. They were a negotiation with something that watched from every tree, every shadow. It had waited for centuries, perhaps longer, feeding on those who faltered, shaping its methods through time. And now it was shaping them around me. The worst night came on the 36th. I had been awake for nearly 2 days, nerves raw, hands trembling. Around midnight, the forest grew utterly still, quieter than I had ever known it. Even the insects hushed. Then, from below, came a sound I had dreaded since the first weak footsteps on the ladder. Slow, deliberate, steady. I froze in my chair, heart slamming. The boards creaked under weight. Step by step, I forced myself to recall the rule. If someone climbs the ladder, and you hear them but never see them, do not open the hatch. But this time, it was worse. The footsteps stopped directly at the hatch, and then a knock came. Light, polite, almost friendly. My skin burned cold. Then a voice. My voice. "Nathan, it's me." "Open up." My stomach turned. I backed away into the corner, shaking my head. The voice repeated, calm, patient. "Nathan, it's me. Open up." It knocked again 3 times, gentle as before. For hours it continued, never angry, never desperate, just steady, confident, as though it knew I would eventually give in. I whispered the rules to myself over and over, clutching the notebook to my chest. The knocking did not stop until dawn. When the first light seeped into the windows, silence fell. I approached the hatch with trembling steps. The wood was clean, no footprints on the ladder. But carved into the hatch itself, in my own handwriting, were the wording, "You will open it soon." I did not eat that day. My stomach rebelled against even the thought of food. I sat by the window, staring at the trees, hollow. The forest no longer needed to lure me with voices of family. It had found the perfect bait myself. How long before exhaustion broke me? How long before I mistook my own thoughts for commands? I wrote in the logbook, though my hand shook so badly the words slanted and blurred. It knows me. It is me. The rules won't hold forever. On the 39th night, the laughter returned. Not children this time, but men and women, dozens of them, rising from the forest floor in waves. Some voices I recognized. My father, Emily, even colleagues from the forestry service. Some were strangers. All of them laughed, circling the tower, their joy rising like smoke. The sound clawed at me, driving nails into my skull. I fell to my knees, hands clamped over my ears, rocking as tears streamed down my face. The laughter rose to a shriek, then stopped all at once. In the silence that followed, a single voice whispered inside my head, clear and cold, "One more rule, Nathan. Write it down." I opened my eyes to find the notebook on the floor, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. My hand moved before I could resist, scribbling words I did not choose. "Do not look into the mirror after midnight." The pen clattered from my hand. My body shook. The rule was written, ink wet and smudged. I did not remember deciding to do it. The forest had written through me. I did not sleep that night, or the next. I destroyed the mirror above the sink again. though I was certain more reflections lingered elsewhere. In the windows, in the lantern glass, even in the sheen of the radio dial. I avoided them all. But the rule had changed everything. It wasn't just a record of survival passed between lookouts. It was a living contract, growing, expanding. The forest wasn't only testing me. It was using me to add to the list, shaping the rules for whoever came after. The notebook is heavier now. It sits on my desk like an anchor, though it weighs no more than before. What drags at me is the knowledge that I am no longer only following the rules. I am creating them. The page I wrote, the one about the mirror, stares back at me whenever I flip through the notebook. My handwriting, crooked from exhaustion, undeniable. I don't know if it was truly me who wrote it, or if the forest guided my hand. Either way, the rule is there, and I obey it. I cover every reflective surface in the cabin, avoid even the sheen of my coffee pot. At night, I keep the lantern dim to prevent glass from catching my image. And yet, I still see movement in the corners of my eyes, faces in the blur of my reflection where none should exist. The forest knows it has worn me down. It does not try to frighten me anymore. It does not need to. Instead, it waits, subtle, patient, letting silence gnaw at my sanity. I wake often in the middle of the night to find the shutters, open though I swear I closed them, or the hatch unlatched though I never touched it. My logbook is filled with gaps, entries that appear in my own writing but recall events I do not remember. One page simply reads, "Over and over, you are already outside." I burned that page in the stove, but the smell lingered for hours, thick and acrid. The 40th night was different. When midnight came, I felt nothing. No voices, no laughter, no footsteps. The silence was pure, unbroken, and for a moment I dared to believe it was over. Maybe I had passed some final test, endured long enough to be left alone. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closing, exhaustion pulling me down. That was when I heard it. A single knock, not at the hatch, but at the window. My eyes flew open. Slowly, against every instinct, I turned my head. In the glass, a face stared back at me. My own face. It smiled when I did not. Its lips moved, though mine stayed still. I could not hear the words, but I knew what it was saying. Open it. I staggered back, knocking over the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. By the time I lit it again, the face was gone, but the glass bore a smear of condensation, as though breath had fogged it from the outside. I stopped keeping track of the nights after that. Time no longer matters. The forest does not attack in storms anymore. It does not need lightning or thunder to mask its approach. It comes in silence, in stillness, in the spaces where I think I am safe. It has moved past voices of family, past tricks of fire and smoke. Now it uses me against myself, my reflection, my voice on the radio, my handwriting in the notebook. I cannot tell where I end and it begins. Yesterday morning, I woke to find the notebook open on the desk, a fresh page filled. The words were neat, deliberate, nothing like my jagged script. When the relief comes, do not follow them. They are not what they seem. My stomach turned to ice. I have been waiting for the helicopter, clinging to the hope that someone will come to take me down from this tower. But if this rule is true, then rescue itself is a trap. The forest has thought of everything. Either I stay and break under its pressure, or I leave and walk into its arms disguised as salvation. There is no way out. Last night, the laughter returned, softer now, almost tender. It drifted up through the trees like a lullaby, coaxing, soothing. My name whispered between chuckles, not threatening but inviting. I sat with the notebook open, staring at the rules. They blur together now, the ink bleeding like wounds. I whispered them as I always do, but the words felt empty. The forest has already found its way past them. They are not walls anymore. They are doors. I don't know if anyone will read this. I don't know if this notebook will outlast me, or if it will burn with the tower when I finally give in. But I write these words because I must, because maybe someone else will take my place one day, and they should know what waits here. The rules are not enough. They never were. They only buy time. And time is the one thing the forest always wins. As I write this, the sun is setting. The mist is rising thick through the valley, curling around the trees like smoke. I can feel the presence pressing closer, not outside anymore, but within the tower within me. The radio hums, steady, though I know soon it will go silent. The shutters rattle though no wind blows. And the hatch, God, the hatch is trembling, as though someone is already on the ladder. I will not open it. I swear I will not. But the knocking has begun, soft and patient, and I hear my own voice calling from below. Nathan, it's time. Let's go home. If anyone finds this notebook, know this: the rules kept me alive as long as they could. Follow them, yes. Obey them with everything you have. But understand that they are not salvation. They are only a stay of execution. The forest is older than rules, older than towers, older than us. And it does not forget. It will wait for you, just as it waited for me.